Hey guys, Dov here, back with another unit highlight. Today we're looking at a unit that is very near and dear to my heart, Goblin Wolf Chariots. Yes indeed, and I have to say, with the updated unit models, these guys look really nice. New textures and everything since the Paunch came out. Speaking of which, Paunch is here to lead his Wolf Chariots. We'll talk more about them in just a sec. As for the builds here though, Greenskins against Skaven, Savage Orc Biggins, along with Orc Boys in the front line, 8 Peak Loons, of course. And yeah, we've also got some Spider Rider Archers, regular Spider Riders, Troll Hag, and yeah, the Chariots, which we'll get to very quickly. First, the Skaven build, some chaff up front, some spears here. We got some Poison Wind Mortars, Warp Lock Giselles, Grinder here, Grinder there. You can see the Warp Lightning Cannon. We've got Council Guard. Yeah, who's the Lord here? I almost said Grom. I was reading it. Oh, there's 2 assassins right there. Okay. And yeah, duh, the Bell is the Lord. Anyway, right off the bat here, this is one that actually took place on my stream a while back, a few days ago. I don't know exactly when this is going to be coming out, but it was a very, very fun game. And Wolf Chariots are going to do their thing, running in, using their mass to push past Skaven front lines. So, real quick, what about Wolf Chariots? They're cheap, number one. They are an archer chariot, but like all quote-unquote archer chariots, or ranged chariots in general, besides war wagons, they really are meant for being chariots. So, against the Skaven, they're actually very good. They have a higher model count than most other chariot units, which is unique outside of Tomb Kings. And they do some nice anti-infantry damage. More importantly, they give you a really cheap disruption tool, and you can see they've been running over weapons teams, rear charging some Skaven slaves there, rear charging. Now these are some Chevron clan rats, and since there's no rat ogres in this Skaven build, they're basically able to just run shop over everything, right? More importantly, keeping the weapons teams shut down, because especially like these mortars right here are super dangerous, right? Everyone knows, or at least you should know, mortars are a terrifying unit, to be honest, so using the Wolf Chariots to take them on, absolutely viable. You can see the Clan Rat Spears pushing up and starting to kind of push them away. The Warp Grinders, unfortunately, which are kind of the counter chariot tools, weren't quite in range, and also having to tag these Spider Riders and other targets. Meanwhile, speaking of which, up on the high ground here, the Hag and these Spiders breaking up this flank quite nicely. There was I missed it here, but there was a dreaded 13th spell from the Gracier Lore Rune, detonated a bunch of Savage Orc Biggins and summoned up some Storm Vermin, but they themselves got routed off there in that melee engagement. And yeah, at this point, the Chariots, breaking unit, they're going to overchase a little bit here and kind of go their merry way. But just to kind of quickly talk about some more things here about them as we keep the battle in the background. At this point, if you want to watch a live cast of it, you can always go watch the stream. But basically, at this point, the Grace here is going to try and do its best, along with the Council Guard and so on here. I believe, did Grom take a bunch of damage? Yeah, it looks like Grom took a bunch of damage from the Assassins earlier. I'm trying to remember. I've casted a lot of games in between now and then, so things are a little hazy. But just in general, these Wolf Chariots, as they just like horribly overkill these Skaven here. Again, the anti-infantry damage is pretty solid. If we have a look at their stats, 38 charge bonus isn't amazing for a chariot, only 16 attack, 24 weapon strength. Again, seems pretty low, but considering their higher model count against low armor targets, their DPS is actually pretty solid, plus 12 bonus versus infantry, of course, as well. 92 speed in particular makes them one of the fastest chariots in the game. Missile damage isn't really anything to write home about. They do have 115 range, which is pretty decent. Longer range than actually like Wolf Ride Archers, for example, but the damage is pretty low. Double shot, like my beloved Pistoliers. But yeah, at this point the battle is pretty well decided. It was a decently quick one. Skaven, you always want to have counter chariot tools against any faction that can bring chariots, especially cheaper chariots, like the Wolf Chariots, and you know, a quick game like this will lead to some extended discussion at the end, you know. The Greenskins take that one home. It's an interesting matchup right now, and I think the Greenskins are in a pretty good place in most matchups. Grom the Paunch, definitely an absolute terror for Skaven. Not as big of a terror as Volkmar, but in the similar vein, just like a very hard-to-kill Chariot Lord. And then, of course, the Goblin Wolf Chariots didn't end up getting chevrons, right? Like, a lot of the chevrons came from these Biggins in the front line. 8 Peak Loons, of course, racking up a ton of kills. 113 for these Orc Boys, 72 there. I've been seeing a lot more Orc Boys recently too, which is kind of fun. But yeah, Aneurysm Sauce, we played a few games, I'm sure. Sorry, he played a few games in that. The last one, I think I casted one of them already. I think it was, yeah, the Marauder Horseman game, I want to say, was from that same session. But anyway, yeah, he had some really good games there. This one, though, I think he would agree, definitely needs some Rat Ogres to try and hold back Chariots. That being said, Wolf Chariots do have the advantage of having fast speed and bows, right? So, like I said, the missile damage isn't really super impactful, but you can kind of skirmish with them a little bit, especially against a target like Rat Ogres that has pretty low HP, and yeah, especially if they're going to be chasing you up close, the 92 speed definitely comes into play there. Just to kind of have a comparison, of course, the ROR having Vanguard, it's pretty nice. A little bit faster fire rates and, you know, better leadership and everything, as you would expect from an ROR, but just in comparison, up until the release of Pump Wagons, this was, I think, the cheapest chariot in the game, I want to say. And even with Pump Wagons, I mean, they're still same price, right? So they're tied with that. And I mean, you just compare other cheap chariots, there's not really a super great direct comparison. Tomb Kings is the other kind of high model chariot, so I guess we could look there. These ones are 800, which are, you would expect them to be a little bit better, right? And they are pretty much across the board, but again, look at that 92 speed versus 74, which even 74 for the Tomb King's chariots is pretty fast. I think only, if I remember correctly, Norska, the Ice Wolf chariot, it's also a wolf chariot, has the same speed, I believe. Yeah, actually even faster, 95 speed plus Frostbite, which is huge. But I mean, the wolf chariots, again, only 500 points, 6 unit models, and you can kind of get some hybrid utility from it. The disruption is very, very key, and I think definitely the most ideal faction, obviously, is the Skaven, right? That's the pretty clear one. Dwarfs, unfortunately, you can use them for some cheap disruption, but they're squishy enough. They only have 45 armor, even like blasting charges will detonate them pretty hard. They'll take a lot of damage, and they just don't have the best AP values. You're much better off to go with like a Pump Wagon or Boar Chariots or something like that. But against Skaven, that's kind of the ideal use case. They can be a sneaky pick to take 1 or 2 against a faction like the Empire as well. That's, you know, their infantry is relatively lighter mass, only really have great swords for heavy infantry, so you're not likely to see, or like Bretonia as well, for example. They can be like a cheap distraction for knights to try and bait them into a bad engagement. If your opponent, you know, doesn't deal with them, then they can potentially do a lot of damage to the Bretonian infantry. So those are a couple matchups where they can potentially shine against the elves as well, especially, I would say, wood elves. A cheap chariot, believe it or not, is really hard for them to deal with in many cases, especially one that's moving this fast, and get in and do a lot of damage to these lighter, more expensive elven infantry. Wood elves, I would say, dark elves, less so for high elves because they tend to have a little bit better armor on their infantry, but it's still probably okay here as, you know, 1 or 2 as a little sneaky pick. But, yeah, Skaven is the most obvious one, certainly. What else can I say about these guys? The ROR is a nice pick for full Vanguard builds. It can give you a little bit of extra anti-infantry kind of shock damage. Again, the charge bonus is really not amazing, but the unit model count means their damage output is surprisingly good. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I'm basically just rambling at this point. But in terms of like direct synergies, there's not really too many. Mainly, you just want to use them for, like I said, disruption. I haven't used them against Coast. I don't think, I mean, you probably squishy enough, and zombies, funny enough, all undead infantry actually is heavy mass, like all zombies and skeletons, even though they, like their weight class, I should say, because there's 2 different stats, right? There's a mass number and then a weight class, and they're all classified as quote-unquote heavy, right? So that means it's harder to like accelerate out of them. There's some other kind of differences there. So because of that, like the light mass, relatively speaking, of the wolf chariots doesn't work quite as well against undead factions. Plus the shock, you know, leadership damage is also not really a thing there, right? Because crumbling is totally balanced. Anyway, Beastmen, maybe Beastmen are fast enough that they can reliably, same with Norska, catch up with the Wolf Chariots. Chaos, I don't know, they have enough heavy infantry, it's probably not as good against them. It's also not that tough of a matchup for Greenskins, in my opinion. Greenskins kind of dominate most of the other Rush factions, but anyway, that's good enough for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.